We are delighted to have Sports Illustrated's Pat Forde back for another season. You can also hear him on the highly entertaining and informative College Football Inquirer podcast, wherever it is you get your pods. Let's start with the big picture here, Pat. How good do you think the Big Ten is this year?
I think at the top, the Big Ten could be really good, Dave. I mean, I think there's a legitimate chance to have two playoff teams out of the Big Ten, and maybe both out of the Big Ten East. You start, obviously, with Ohio State, which I understand ranking them behind Alabama. I have them behind Alabama, but I wouldn't be shocked if those two maybe jockey back and forth as this season goes along. We'll see. You guys laid it out very well in the open there. How does that defense look under Jim Knowles? If they take the steps forward that we believe they will, I think Ohio State is an elite team because we know the offense is going to roll. No real questions about that side of the ball for them, and I think the defense will be a lot better. Then I think Michigan is a quality second-best team at this point. I think the offense is going to be the best that Jim Harbaugh has had there. We talked about the surplus of quarterback talent, but then the running backs, receivers, tight end, a quality offensive line. They've got to replace some people on defense. If they can do that adequately, I think Michigan has a chance for an excellent season as well. And as you said, the schedule gives them a chance to ramp up. There's plenty of other good teams in the Big Ten, but I start with those two, and I think they could both be in the playoff hunt deep into this season.
That was kind of our conclusion, too, coming out of our preseason tour, was there's a pretty big gap between those two and everyone else, which spoke more to how good those two are than to the rest of the league. But we shall see. Again, both teams, we'll learn a lot here in the early weeks, probably more about Ohio State than we will about Michigan early on. We learned a little bit about Northwestern and Nebraska on Saturday, as did much of the country. About 4.5 million people watched that game. Northwestern getting the win in Dublin. I understand a lot of the narratives about Nebraska, and I do want to get your take on them. But Northwestern's been so up and down, a team that's won the Big Ten West 2 of the last 4 years and finished last in the other 2 years. What did you learn about the Wildcats on Saturday?
Well, the feast or famine cycles back up to feast, it looks like, right? I mean, that was an impressive performance to come back the way they did, and just a lot of Pat Fitzgerald characteristics there. Taking punches in the mouth, responding, not, panicking, waiting and making the most of your opportunities. They played a smart field position game, almost a Ferencian game management style at times out of Pat Fitzgerald there. Some strategic punts, some very conservative third down calls. It all worked out. I was really just impressed with how physical they were, especially as the game wore on. Peter Skoronski, we knew he was a great left tackle, but the way the rest of the offensive line played and the way they blocked for Evan Hull and their other running backs was super impressive to me, and they dominated that line of scrimmage and really pushed Nebraska around the more that game went along.
I would agree. We had Fitz on yesterday. We were talking about that, really both sides of the line of scrimmage. I like Ferencian as an adjective there, but they have a punter who I think Kirk Ferentz would really like in Luke Akers.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, he's got a good punter himself, but David Akers' son was really fabulous in terms of flipping field position in that game. Okay, let's take the Nebraska point of view on this. There's so much pressure on Scott Frost. He's now 15-30 as the head coach at Nebraska. What conclusions did you draw in watching the Huskers on Saturday?
Well, it's a little bit of a Hail Mary season for him, and I think the conclusions are the same ones we left 2021 with at this point. They still don't know how to win close games. They find ways to lose instead of finding ways to win. They were defeated soundly at the line of scrimmage. The defense didn't tackle well, didn't cover that well, got pushed off the ball. Quarterback made some very good plays, but some very bad plays. Sound familiar? Yeah, it sounds like Nebraska 2021, and they've got to be better than that. And I think that just ramps up the pressure for the rest of this month. They've got a couple very winnable games, and then after that, I think it just makes the Oklahoma game loom that much larger for Nebraska to step in, step up, and get a big win, the kind of win that has eluded them throughout the Frost era.
No doubt. You beat Oklahoma and all's forgiven, but it's easier said than done. We'll see whether they can rectify some of those issues here going forward over the next couple of weeks. We were talking about Ohio State earlier and the degree to which you think they and Michigan have separated themselves and put themselves in a position to be CFP teams. You're going to see Ohio State in person this week, that huge showdown against Notre Dame at the Shoe. You mentioned Jim Knowles and that defense. What are kind of your areas of focus in this game aside from that?
Well, you know what? Notre Dame's got a heck of a defense as well, and some players talking rather confidently about it. So how do they match up with an Ohio State offensive line that I think it was good, but at times could have been more physical and provided a better run blocking power last year? So is that improved? But really, I look at just kind of the whole picture, Dave, and I see a program where Ryan Day was not afraid to put a lot of pressure on them in the preseason. He said 11-2 is a good season at a lot of places. Wasn't for us. We didn't beat our rival. We didn't win the Big Ten. We didn't win the national championship. Now, if you're going to set a premise where that is what you need to do to have a successful season, that's a very high bar. Not even Ohio State has cleared that bar very often in its history in terms of accomplishing all three of those things. So I think we saw the amount of disappointment that there was for not just losing but being dominated by Michigan, the early loss to Oregon. Hey, I am fine with confidence and with setting the bar high, but you're also putting pressure on your team to perform well. And if they don't come out of the gates well against Notre Dame, does that start snowballing into a lot of anxiety as that game goes along and then thereafter into the season?
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, Ryan Day and I were talking about this when he was on the set with us for media days. I mean, most places you win all but two of your games, and you win the Rose Bowl in one of the most thrilling games that we can remember in the sport, and it feels like you've done some pretty good things, but that's just the bar is so high in Columbus. And to your point, they do embrace it, but it means that a lot of seasons are not going to measure up if you basically set the standard at we have to win the national championship, otherwise it's not good enough. It hasn't quite measured up the last couple of years in State College either with Penn State, and they have a really intriguing game. Anthony and I were talking about this one a little bit earlier in the show, but tomorrow night against Purdue, again, the atmosphere should be amazing at Ross-Ade Stadium. What intrigues you the most about this matchup with two teams with high expectations where one of them comes away feeling great in week one, but one of them already feels like then they're behind the eight ball?
Yeah, that's the thing about having a conference game to start. Boy, I mean, there's a lot at stake. And as you said, the trajectories of the two programs, I think, are very much at stake here. Penn State, as you and Anthony covered, has not performed well early in this season, or the last two seasons, I'm sorry. And there's a lot of pressure on them to get back to being Penn State. Can you win 9, 10, 11 games? Can you compete in the Big Ten East? Can you stop losing to more middle-tier Big Ten teams? So a lot, I think, riding on Penn State there, but also for Purdue. Jeff Brom has built that program. They do have some significant personnel losses. I mean, like all-time great players at receiver and rush end there that they're replacing. But is recruiting good enough that you can replace those guys? And then we have the AARP quarterback derby here. Sean Clifford and Aiden O'Connell have been at it since I don't know when. Joe Tiller and Joe Paterno going at each other. So, but they're good quarterbacks, and if hopefully they both stay healthy all season, and we get to see what they can do.
Yes, Aiden O'Connell said, "I'll see your sixth year, and I'll raise you by getting married." Right? That was the. Finally, I asked Anthony about it. I just feel like everyone's got to weigh in. If you're coming on this show, you're going to weigh in about the King Solomon-inspired decision by Jim Harbaugh. What do you make of the Michigan quarterback rotation for these first two games?
Well, Jim Harbaugh's never afraid to do things in an unconventional manner. There's one more example of that. It's a little bit Spurrier-esque. If you remember when Steve Spurrier was at Florida, and he actually, for a while, rotated quarterbacks every play. He sent in plays with rotating quarterbacks in the mid-'90s. So this isn't quite that weird. I actually like the strategy or the logic behind this because you're giving each quarterback a start so that one of them isn't saying, hey, I never got my chance. And one of them's not just coming off the bench and hoping I have a really good series and I get to stay in the game. No, they're both starting. They're both going to have the chance there. The schedule sets it up and gives them the opportunity for that. And as much as I didn't like Michigan dropping some quality opponents in this year and years to come, this does play into his hands for this. The other thing, I think it increases the chances that you keep both quarterbacks on the roster for the entire season. I don't see one of these quarterbacks transferring. That's one thing. If you make your decision August 15th, we're going with Cade McNamara, J.J. McCarthy may say, all right, I'm out. This way, you've got them both through September 10th, and they're both going to get an equal shot at winning the job.
It is hard to keep everyone happy, especially in the portal era, and that is a challenge. It is different than it was even 4 or 5 years ago. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. Pat, really excited to have you with us every Wednesday. It's always a treat to check in with you, and enjoy your time in Columbus this weekend.
Thank you, Dave. Happy to be back. Happy football season.
Anthony rejoins me. It is time for the inaugural edition this year of the Impact 5.
Right.
And of course, as always, we do it Letterman style.
Or Seacrest style, depending on perhaps what generation you view television in.
I paused just for you to get Seacrest
Right,
in there.
please do.
We counted down from 5 to 1. So the 5 best teams in the Big Ten, starting with number 5, where are you going?
Well, I mean, obviously this is preseason, so we'll
Right.
have a little bit more tangible evidence moving forward here. But I struggled a bit with number 5. I'm starting in State College because I believe that Penn State has enough proven commodities where I feel good about where the Nittany Lions are at this point. Sean Clifford he's shown himself as one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten when he's been healthy. Apparently, true freshman, very talented. Drew Aller is going to be the backup, so Sean Clifford's health will tell the tale this year. I'm confident in their defense. Manny Diaz, great defensive coordinator every stop he's been at. They got playmakers, certainly on the back end and up front. But can the Penn State offense keep Sean Clifford healthy enough? If they do, then they're certainly one of the top 5.
We're going to dive into them a little bit deeper with Audrey Snyder coming up. But you think about last year, and it was disappointing down the stretch, losing 6 of 8. 5 of their losses were by a total of 21 points. So they were not far away, and we know how well they started. So they are number 5. Who's number 4?
For me, it's a team that I think is being a bit underrated, sort of disregarded in East Lansing. I feel like Michigan State is a squad that returns more than enough from last year. And they've got one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten in Peyton Thorne, who comes back. They've got Jaden Reed, who's going to be back at wide receiver. They're very deep and talented in the running back room. They just had K9, who emerged as the best of the bunch last season. So we didn't see a lot of these other guys. And oh, by the way, the Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year ends up transferring in. And one of the top running back recruits in the country transfers in Jalen Berger as well. And I just love the approach. Mel Tucker's coaching staff is super deep. So not only will the players, I think, be better within the scheme, I believe their coaching staff is amongst the best in the entire country through Mel Tucker's leadership.
And to your point, and Jarek Broussard, also, as you mentioned, coming in from Colorado, Mel Tucker was fired up about both those guys when we were at camp. But they do have 72% of their production coming back. It's the third most in the Big Ten. I mean, I understand they lost Walker, as you said, and he won the Doak Walker Award. He was tremendous, but man, there's still a lot of talent there in East Lansing. So I'm with you. Who's number 3?
The team that I believe will win the Big Ten West Division this year. Right now in preseason, it's about what I know. What is a proven commodity? And the Minnesota Golden Gophers have more proven commodities than any other team in the Big Ten West Division. With all the defenses that are in that division, can you throw an off-speed pitch? When your fastball is being slowed down or even stopped, Minnesota, their fastball is certainly to run the football, but they are deep at wide receiver. They've got the most experienced quarterback in the Big Ten who returns in Tanner Morgan. And we saw the 2019 version of Tanner Morgan under Kirk Ciarrocca's leadership, his tutelage as an offensive coordinator. So if we can go to the Wayback Machine, that Ciarrocca and Morgan relationship, can that passing attack expand like it did in 2019? Now you've got a really, really dangerous squad. I mean, Iceman, trust me, they're as dangerous as any team in the Big Ten.
Yeah, 4th in the nation in passing efficiency, Tanner Morgan was that year. We'll see if they can recapture some of that magic, and the defense just improved by leaps and bounds last year. So now we're down to 2. I'm going to take a leap and assume that it's Michigan and Ohio State in some order. So where are you going? Do you have the defending champs at number 2, or do they stay at number 1?
I've got the defending champs at number 2 for now. There are a lot of questions personnel-wise on Michigan's defense, but there's been anything that's been stellar throughout most of the time Jim Harbaugh's been there. It's been more so the defense, more so the consistency they have there. Not always against Ohio State, but against most of the other squads that Michigan plays within this conference. They've been stellar on defense, so I think they're going to be good again over there, even though you're replacing coordinators on that side. They've been within this scheme. And then offensively, replacing coordinators there as well. If I'm Sharon Moore, I'm licking my chops for the opportunity to call plays for this group with 2 different quarterbacks. It's kind of a problem, but it's a great problem to have. This is a first-class problem to have 2 QBs as talented as Michigan does.
Yeah, I don't buy at all into that notion of if you've got 2, you don't have any.
Depends on the 2.
Yeah, but these two are really
legit.
good,
They're
right? I
legit.
mean, this is a legitimate challenge of we got a guy who led us to the playoff, and we got another guy who is every bit as good in our mind. But yeah, you're coming off a 12-win season, just their second in 115 years. You can understand why they're excited in Ann Arbor. So that means, by process of elimination,
right,
Ohio State is number 1 on your Impact 5. Why do you have them ahead of Michigan, despite the fact the last time we saw these two on the field together, Michigan pasted them?
I get the notion, I get the vibe from Ryan Day that he's thinking along the same wavelength I am, which to me gives me confidence that he's right because he's agreeing with me.
Well, yeah, if he agrees with you,
of course.
Sure.
How could he be wrong? I think he recognizes what one of the ailments were that went against the Buckeyes last year. The physicality on the line of scrimmage, getting pushed around on offense. I believe it negated some of their success that was potentially there on defense as well because they practiced against maybe more of a finesse style. So he's going to come out and look to push folks around on the line of scrimmage more this season. That suits Ohio State. And when you have one of the most gifted, one of the most talented teams in America who's ticked off, who goes into this season feeling like, winning the Rose Bowl, that just wasn't our standard. 11 wins, that wasn't our standard. I think that is a dangerous position for the Ohio State Buckeyes to be in with that additional motivation. Just like we saw in 2020, where they went to the college football playoff the year before, said, no, that wasn't good enough. We want more.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, look, everyone agrees with you. The the writers, Cleveland.com poll, every single one of them, chose Ohio State not just to win the East, but to win the entire Big Ten.
They didn't ask my opinion, but you did, and I believe they're right.
Yeah, they didn't ask my opinion either.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. These are two reasonable opinions here.
I'm the expert, though, Dave.
That is true. Back on Big Ten today, the anticipation at a fever pitch in West Lafayette, season opener against Penn State tomorrow night on Fox. It will be a blackout game. Purdue reminding its fans what happened the last time they had a blackout at Ross-Ade, the amazing 49-20 win over Ohio State in 2018. The Nittany Lions head in today. The bus carrying their equipment departed last night. For Penn State, it is the 12th time in the last 13 seasons they will play their Big Ten opener on the road. Audrey Snyder covers the Nittany Lions for The Athletic. She joins us now. And Audrey, there's so much talk about this schedule. What is the balancing act for James Franklin between making it public and kind of reminding those who are in charge of the schedule making what this has looked like here recently for them, versus not psyching your team out and not making them feel like they come in at some sort of a disadvantage?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, James Franklin has made this very, very public. He's not happy with it, understandably so. I mean, like you mentioned, they've opened up on the road a ton, and it's something that new athletic director Pat Kraft has already gone to the conference. They've talked about it. He's addressed it. And Kraft said, yeah, this isn't right. We shouldn't have to keep opening on the road. And so James Franklin had mentioned it back at Big Ten Media Days in July, and he brought it up again in his opening statement this week. So he is certainly keeping the receipts in terms of how often they've opened up on the road. But in terms of it maybe helping them a little bit in this regard, you can look at the fact that they opened the season last year at Wisconsin. You go into Camp Randall, and Franklin did say this week that, some of the older players were able to share that experience a little bit with the younger players, just of what it's like, for some of these guys, their first time going on the road for a college football team. So I know they do take photos of the sideline, the locker rooms, everything, to try and help the younger guys or people who haven't been to Ross-Ade Stadium prepare before. So not ideal for Penn State to be opening on the road, but James Franklin likes the Thursday night game a little bit just because they'll get some time on the back end once they return to State College around, let's say 4 a.m. Friday.
Let's dive into this team. And I think the biggest thing we were watching when we were on our camp tour was the offensive line. It just has to get better. And it's kind of been a common theme. And I think James has handled it really well, where he's saying, I'm not making any promises anymore about the offensive line being better. But what is your sense as to the extent to which that group has improved?
Yeah, no doubt they have to be better. I think one of the things that James has said all preseason is he's taking what he's called a measured approach with the offensive line. He said, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you all that this is going to be the year, because he's done that in the past. And he goes, quite frankly, it hasn't worked. So it's kind of, hey, let's see how things go Thursday night. And you all, the beat writers, let us know how we're doing. So, yeah, right. Like, so we'll all find out Thursday night. But one of the things that they have talked a lot about is using analysts and bringing analysts in to help Phil Trautwein, just as another sounding board in the media room. Of course, Trautwein being their offensive line coach. And so, there's a lot of belief there that also the depth up front is better. Now, you can look at it. James Franklin said they view Hunter Norzad, the Cornell graduate transfer, as someone who's going to get starters reps. So whether or not Norzad starts, we'll see. But Sal Wormley is another guy who they were banking on being a starter last year, but then they lost him before the season even started with a season-ending injury. So, you're going to have a lot of new faces up front, one of them being Landon Tangwall, presumably at left guard. But again, Tangwall was the headliner in his recruiting class. Fans have been clamoring to see more of him now for over a year. So to me, the talent is there. They've got enough talent on paper. The depth is better. But now, can it go out and can they be a strength? We'll see.
Yeah, it was a clear weakness last year. I mean, they allowed the most pressures. They allowed the most sacks, the second most tackles for loss of any team in the Big Ten. So it didn't really work in the run game. It didn't really work in the pass game. And the run game in general suffered. I've said it a bunch of times. It's just a staggering number to me. Their longest touchdown run last year was 7 yards. And yet you look at the running backs, and I got to say, when we were there in camp, I mean, you can see why people are excited about Nick Singleton. He was kind of the headliner. Man, Katron Allen, every bit as good. It feels like they should be able to run the ball with those backs, assuming the line is good enough. What's your sense of the running back kind of rotation and how much we might see those freshmen?
Yeah, I am, like everyone, very, very curious to see what that rep distribution looks like. Like you mentioned, they are super, super high on Nick Singleton and his classmate, Katron Fat Man Allen. These are two guys that they brought in with genuine excitement about both of them. And so far this preseason, they have lived up to it. These are both guys that were able to get here in January. So they've been here for a little while. But I still expect that Kevon Lee is going to be the starter. They believe that there's even more to Lee than what we've seen so far. But to me, what Singleton brings is that breakaway speed. And this is, your reigning Gatorade National Player of the Year. He's somebody who's going to be able to take the ball the distance, which this offense has lacked. They haven't had that explosive ability in general. And of course, it showed up in the run game. So, yeah, I am very curious to see what they do with those running backs. Maybe you see a role for Katron Allen. Maybe he becomes kind of the short yardage guy. But again, you've got three backs that they feel really, really good about. And then, your most veteran guy in that group is Devin Forde. Forde presumably is still going to have a key special teams role, but I would not be surprised at all if we see Nick Singleton back returning kicks, because again, it's just another way to get the ball in one of your most explosive players' hands.
Speaking of highly touted freshmen, Drew Aller comes in as a five-star quarterback that everyone wanted. He was named the backup for this game this week, which I think is really interesting. We saw some of Christian Veyer last year when Sean Clifford got hurt, and Sean Clifford was banged up throughout the year. How much of that do you feel like? I mean, it's such a weird situation now with these highly touted quarterbacks where you almost feel like you have to keep them engaged because otherwise you never know when they could depart. How much of it is that? How much of it is Aller really standing out? Do you have any feel for that?
I honestly think it's the latter. I mean, getting to know Drew and his family a little bit throughout his recruitment, they never struck me as the type of people that if he's not playing, we're just going to pack up and leave. That, I never got that impression from them. And I thought Penn State was very measured when Drew got here in the winter, and everything we heard all spring was, hey guys, Drew's doing well, but so is his classmate Bo Pribula. So they brought in two quarterbacks. I was stunned that James Franklin said who his number 2 quarterback is, because again, they don't release a depth chart. So the fact that he acknowledged it and then doubled down and said, hey, we compile all the data. It's the coach's decision. It's also based off of the gut reaction. And remember, it was Mike Yurcich who fell in love with Drew, who went out, who recruited him, who really maintained that strong relationship with the quarterback. And to come out and just flat out beat the presumed backup, it's notable. And I think now, it's been interesting. A lot of the talk with Penn State fans now is they're very intrigued for that Ohio game next week, because you might be able to see, presumably, your backup quarterback, which everyone wants to see Drew. That's been the whole theme here all along. So, to me, it's a really good sign. But again, you've got legitimate depth and competition in that room. And James Franklin said, listen, Drew's our guy this week. He's the number 2, but we'll see. So I think it's definitely going to be something to monitor all year. But again, should Sean Clifford get banged up and have to miss a series, now you're turning it over to the freshman. That to me is really, really interesting. It just, again, how it played out. But yeah, I think when you look at Drew, his build is noticeable. The way the ball comes off of his hand, I remember the first time I watched him throw live last year, I left the practice field in Ohio thinking, whoa, this guy's legit. It's every bit as advertised. So I want to see more of him as well, but very curious to see how it plays out.
No doubt, physically impressive kid when we saw him in camp. The other big storyline in my mind is the transition on defense with Manny Diaz as the new defensive coordinator. Brent Pry moving on, became the head coach at Virginia Tech. How much pressure do you think there is on Manny? We know how good the defense has kind of been year in and year out. He lost a lot of star power, particularly up front on that defense. Secondary obviously should be loaded. But here you are, you're a new DC, and oh, by the way, you got to go up against one of the best offensive minds in the game in your very first game in Jeff Brom.
Yeah, I think if you're Manny Diaz, you have to love this. And one of the things I think maybe was the quote of the preseason was, the question here, of course, is linebacker, right? Penn State doesn't have that linebacker depth. And Manny Diaz said, listen, I understand that we're a question mark, but the guys in my room weren't recruited here to be a question mark. So I think he's really embracing, the role that he's been in. The players have totally bought into him, and we noticed it in the spring. The energy that Manny Diaz brings to a practice field is really noticeable. You see him out there, he wears cleats to practice. He's, putting the balls in the jugs machine and just kind of going nonstop with his commentary and critiques. It's like, I think this guy wakes up in the morning and just pops out of bed and is always coaching. It's very noticeable when you see it in settings like that. So I think he's embracing it, but absolutely, the defense last year kept Penn State in so many games. They were tremendous. I still think this defense is going to be very, very good. And again, until we really get a good feel for this offense and what it does well, and once they get clicking, they're going to need to rely on this defense. And of course, the big question is linebacker. And you don't have the depth there. They're going to start Tyler Elsdon in the middle, but Kobe King, as backup, is also going to play a lot. You got Jonathan Sutherland at Sam, who's the converted safety, now playing that hybrid outside linebacker role. So you got a lot of question marks there, but absolutely, it's going to be a super, super loaded secondary, and look for Manny Diaz to use that to his advantage. You've got an extremely deep cornerback room and safety room. So I think they're going to do everything they can within reason to get as many of those guys on the field to try and, minimize some of their weaknesses.
Audrey, I'll leave it with this. This is a team that got as high as number 4 in the nation last year, and then it kind of fell apart. They lost 6 of their last 8 games, 11-11 the last 2 years. James Franklin got a massive contract extension here in the offseason. How do you define success for Penn State? In your mind, a successful season is what?
To me, a successful season is Penn State legitimately pushing for that title in the Big Ten East. And I think, a lot of fans look at this and you say, okay, well, you've got a 6th-year quarterback. A lot of this year, I think success is going to be what happens behind the scenes. And that's going to be Drew Aller's development. That's going to be what you do with these young running backs who we're going to see, and we're going to see probably a lot of. But to me, this is one of those unusual years where you say, okay, record-wise, what's success? Every team's going to tell you they want to compete for a national championship. I get it. the Big Ten East is going to be loaded. If they can try to push Ohio State a little bit, I mean, I'm expecting Penn State to be around an 8-4 team this year. But again, can you make strides with these young playmakers that you have, because they've recruited so well? There's so much talent there. But I think that's how you maybe have to kind of reframe it to see the success this year. So for me, it's get these young guys as ready as you can, continue building your depth, and then we'll see what things look like next year, when you make that transition at quarterback to whoever it may be.
Audrey, great stuff as always. Safe travels to West Lafayette, and thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care.
After seeing them in camp, I know I am excited about Maryland. I think this is going to be a really good team, particularly offensively. The questions, of course, surrounding the defense. You are going to be calling that game on Saturday. Give us a sense of what you'll be focusing on most closely.
I'm going to really watch closely. I mean, the talent advantage should certainly go to Maryland, but when you look at the other roster for Buffalo, there's a lot of guys who transferred from the Power 5 level that are going to be there with the Bulls when they show up in College Park. So the talent disparity may not be the most huge aspect of the game. Can Maryland play clean, efficient football? It's one thing to look for those huge chunk plays. Really excited about one of the deeper wide receiver cores in college football. Talia Tagovailoa, to me, the number 2 quarterback in the Big Ten this season. So there's a lot from that perspective to be excited about. But you mentioned the line of scrimmage, that offensive line, plenty to be looking forward to there. But just on the whole, there were a lot of unforced errors for Maryland last season. Be mistake-free, be efficient, don't have a lot of penalties. Do that well, and then we'll see where the defense, ends up as well, with Brian Williams leading the way.
Yeah, I got to get a little bit better there. Nearly 39 points per game in conference play, among the 5 worst in the Power 5.
I like
but
their back end. They're talented in the secondary.
Yes.
Let's see if that front 7 steps forward.
But definitely, no doubt, penalties, turnovers have been a huge story. What about Illinois and Indiana, a conference game? So again, it does heighten the stakes there. We've seen the Illini. We haven't seen the Hoosiers. What stands out here?
I was talking about roster turnover with Buffalo. Man, Indiana's got so much roster turnover. And so there's going to be all that newness that's on the field. And I believe the intangible for the Hoosiers, that will need to show itself, because I believe that's what showed for Nebraska. Being over in Dublin, one thing went wrong, and a lot of guys who haven't been in huddles together, on sidelines together before, in critical moments together, we saw that fall apart really quickly for the Huskers. And I believe for the Hoosiers, that's going to be key. You're going to have a team who's already played a game in the Illini, so they're likely to be able to throw a haymaker at you earlier just because they've already gotten lathered up this year. So what do all these players, how much has Tom Allen been able to instill his LEO into that locker room just to get the guys kind of, on the same page? And can they respond to difficult moments together in games?
I hear you. 13 players out of the portal, 5 new assistants, 2 new coordinators, so massive turnover there for sure. One team that was conspicuously absent from your Impact 5, the Iowa Hawkeyes. They were the West champs. They bring back,
weren't they?
They bring back the overwhelming majority of their defensive production. So what kept them out as they prepare for the Jackrabbits?
I won't be shocked if I was able to pitch a shutout in this game with that defense because of all that talent that returns. Looking forward to Jack Campbell. There's a preseason Heisman possibility for a linebacker with all the types of plays he can make. On the back end, Riley Moss. There's a lot of fun players. The deepest linebacker core in the country. The secondary isn't too far behind them, just in depth of playmaking ability. In the end, though, what is the Hawkeye offense going to look like? Some young and talented running backs, obviously an extremely experienced quarterback, really 2 of them when it comes down to it. Can Spencer Petras, I talked about efficiency with Maryland, make sure you're playing within yourself, get them lined up in the proper run play. They're really banged up at wide receiver, so I don't anticipate big growth to be seen in the opening game from the Iowa passing offense because they're really injured outside right now.
No doubt, and they were underwhelming to begin with on offense last year. Give me a quick thought on Minnesota before we go.
The Gophers are so good, and I just think that because of all the playmakers available to them, the efficiency that's there, they know their identity on each side of the ball at this point as well. Really excited to see just how they deploy all these different assets, and if we do see what was the best version of Tanner Morgan from 2019 again.
You and I are both intrigued. They got a lot of talent, both sides of the ball, no question about it. I'm with you. I think they may very well come in as the West favorite. We've got football tomorrow.
Yes, man.
We will see you then on Big Ten Today.